So, if art was a collection of fruits that make up a smoothie, the Duffer brothers are more of a blender than a tree. They are as incapable of organically producing a product as I am of describing people without using hyper-specific technological analogies.
Like, if we're trying to sell it as she's gonna kill herself, and then she kills herself. Yeah.
One might call the D-Bros plagiarists, but I'd say that's factually incorrect. I'd say the Duffers are adapters. But not adapters as in adapting a screenplay, no, adapters as in a plug. I told you this, I have a problem. Disposable, cheap ones that short-circuit and just as quickly fry and burn, and without proper inlet and an outlet, they are a useless, functionless piece of plastic junk. There's nothing interesting or complex about their insides, their hardware, their wiring, zero computational power. The only thing they have is a singular aptitude of being able to be penetrated in order to turn one thing into another kind of thing, but never themselves create anything. Which finally brings me to my non-tech analogy. The Duffers are like D&D. No, not the board game. I don't think they even know what that is.
My D&D knowledge is embarrassingly low.
And no, not because of the shit from the butt finale, and not because there's two of them, but because they're better adapters than actual storytellers on their own merit, except for one hyper-specific and highly significant detail. At least D&D had the rights to their own source material. A generationally talented, legendary actress, Millie Bobby Brown, once said that she does not like films, that she doesn't even watch films. Which births an interesting conundrum and a question: should an artist, along with their craft, be accepted or respected if their art comes from a place of pure disinterest and complete self-interest? Should a product of their labor even be considered art? Which is a funny notion that Millie Bobby Brown probably adopted from her adopted fathers, Duffer and Dufferer, considering that the writing pair admittedly dislike writing.
Ross and I had no interest in writing at all.
We did not think of ourselves as writers at all. Still don't really think of myself as a writer.
We're not writers. We don't see ourselves as writers.
We really wanted to direct. That was all we were interested in.
We wanted to direct.
We realized that
we
we needed to learn to write.
the best way in was probably writing.
And that we could leverage that. Yeah,
lesson
and make
there.
peace with writing. You're not gonna like it, but just...
They have gone on record multiple times stating that the only reason they took up writing was to be able to direct, which implies the intention of giving it up once they had successful directing careers, which they evidently chose not to follow up on.
I mean, the thing that's cool is the giant monster.
And I don't think that the reason why is because they fell passionately in love with the pen. No, Ross, not that kind of passion. Take it out of your mouth. I've never felt more like a mom in my fucking life, and I have a cat. I think the reason is the same one as why they never chose to kill off any of their 500 characters. They are, for the lack of a better word, cowardly and stubborn as fuck. Every time the Duffers will be faced with a decision, you bet they will make the most safe and comfortable one for themselves, even if it goes against their craft's best interests.
We're going to try to get the entire remainder of this season in our heads and understand it.
But do you have a script?
No.
And that is what happens when an artist is in it for themselves as opposed to art. Their craft sooner or later will become corrupted by decisions that seem irrational and only make sense when seen through the lens of opportunism and personal gain. When one has zero personal investment in their own work, their decision making and direction will become lazier and lazier because there's less personal gain in making something more difficult than it absolutely has to be. At the end of the day, only to produce something that looks like art but is devoid of fundamentalities of it, the emotion, passion, intention, and soul. However, the Buffer's biggest flaw is not their lack of passion for their jobs. Passion is not something you can force onto yourself. Their mistake was in their stubbornness and unwillingness to step back or wrap it up once their need to prove themselves as filmmakers became insufficient in fueling their artistic potential, to the point where it became a necessity and a second nature to them to take literal years to complete singular scripts, bullshit around and lie. Like like lying about having the finale thought through years in advance and lie about it again in the very documentary documenting their inability to come up with the set finale as they're filming the set finale.
We are shooting episode 8, which isn't completely written yet, spoiler alert. So we don't even fully know what's going on.
We're not going to get a final script in time for you to do this, so we're going to have to base it on conversations with them.
That's it, yeah.
It's not like we don't know the ending. It's like it's all plotted out. I just have to write it.
Oftentimes it is said that it is an industry standard to start the production process for films and TV shows without the finished script. If you ask me, the above-mentioned sentiment is the one we should all collectively take and shove a nuke up in its anus, since too many recite it as a reasonable excuse to excuse and normalize shit writing practices.
All right. Wow. Thank you, guys.
In order to give checked-out writers a scapegoat once they come onto the set to make their unprofessionalism everybody else's problem.
I don't know if you have enough intel from that to raise an alarm bell. Like, I can't get these sets ready in time.
And they just
have
threw
to
a
know
whole
exactly
new
what's
concept of
happening.
like what the floor is like and the nature of the roots and the membranous nature of it all. It's like, do we need to factor that into the physical build of this set? I mean, dude, the devil's in the screen direction. We're gonna get a script and it's gonna be like, oh, there's the other like 70% of business that we couldn't account for.
But why do we have to have them in the desert then?
Because they run through the entire cave system and then down into the desert, and then I don't know what the fuck happens to them.
Unless it's a very small production with little to no autonomy, high stakes, and troublingly limited production time. Nowadays, Stranger Things seems like the antithesis of such a phenomenon, but ironically, years ago, it used to be the poster child of it. Season 1 of Stranger Things was greenlit by Netflix in April of 2015. The filming started September 25th, which gave the Duffers and their collaborators mere weeks to complete episodes worth of scripts, forcing them to write along and around the shooting schedule so that the show could premiere in July of 2016, mere 15 months after being greenlit. To put this into perspective, the time it took to write, pre-produce, cast, scout, film, edit, post-produce, market, and premiere the entire first season of Stranger Things is around the same amount of time the Duffers were given to simply write season 5. A mission they successfully failed.
We went into production without having a finished script for the finale.
Just like season 1, the Duffers step onto the set of season 5 without the finished scripts, except unlike season 1, they had years instead of weeks of time to write a couple of episodes of TV. And all that because they have no interest in writing. They never had. So should a person devoid of interest in their art be accepted or respected? I don't know. I don't know if they should or shouldn't be. What I do know is that they won't be. Not by their peers, not by their subordinates, not by other artists.
Wednesday is shooting 8 Cave. It's
Episode
exciting.
8
Episode
is red.
8.
Red for red alert.
A Netflix documentary is the biggest proof of that very notion. Watching this documentary is like watching someone sneak into the Academy to engrave their name on an Oscar, only to go ahead and get a Razzie.
It's based on like scientific theory.
It's all very realistic.
When you guys read 8, it will make more sense.
And what a better way to prove your humble genius than invite an entire documentary crew to film you doing it. Let's watch the exhausted crew contemplate suicide as they're forced to deal with unprofessional, spoiled 40-year-old toddlers who feel more than comfortable about taking advantage of their subordinates' time and professionalism, while also making half-assed excuses.
I used to be like 7 days a week, blah, 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 and I can't do it anymore with the I have 2 kids now, and it's just like,
Yeah.
do you guys have kids?
Yeah, that's cool.
They're 40. Yeah, but you remember. Do you remember? I mean,
I was working when they were young.
Yes, Matt, Ross, whatever. You are, in fact, the first person to impregnate a woman while also having a job. And all this just so that they can play with their squishies some more. I wish that was a joke.
The Duffer brothers, who do Stranger Things, they are both 40-year-old men, and they have these toys. They have about 50 of them. But it's just so funny because it's like, oh, they broke another squishy banana. Can someone get a squishy banana? And they're totally being serious. It's like a PA like running to go get a fucking squishy banana. Squishy banana. The actors then started to steal. It became a thing. I mean, I should honestly just have it. You should.
Also, if anyone is wondering, I did recreate the entire buyer's living room from the alphabet scene for the intro sequence, and I thought it would be a cool idea to put the entire project on my Patreon for free to access for the people who are interested in that kind of thing. So you can check it out, play around with it, maybe put yourself in there, I don't know. And while you're at it, you can also check out my Patreon. Yeah. Well, back to the video. Here's an interesting thing about nostalgia. Once a thing like E.T., It, Goonies, Alien, Star Wars, Jaws reaches a certain level of cultural and historic zeitgeist, it outgrows its very being. It stops being considered a piece of art and starts to be seen as a cultural phenomenon. It begins to be thought of as public domain, not legally, but socioculturally. Because of this, the term nostalgia gives a lot of creatives a metaphorical license and a free pass to treat the fruit of other people's historic hard work as open source. If a thing is old and legendary enough, we can openly repeat and capitalize off of their iconography, ideas, their imagery, their words, as much as we want, as long as it comes with a scribbled preamble titled A Love Letter To. And once you start looking, you'll never stop noticing that every little thing about Stranger Things just happens to be someone else's idea.
The opening scene of Stranger Things is, our kids playing Dungeons and Dragons and eating pizza, and there's obviously the scene in E.T. where the kids are playing D&D.
My D&D knowledge is embarrassingly low. We have characters sort of walking down these train tracks. That was a big part of Stand By Me, as they were following the train tracks to the body. So that's probably our most direct homage.
Nothing is safe from the Buffers. You think the title of the show is cool? Of course you think so. Stephen King worked his ass off to come up with his book, Needful Things. Or the scene of the Demogorgon coming through the wall. That's not a ripoff of A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's obviously a loving homage. No one in their right mind would rip off something so famous. But it's all a falsity. Nostalgia does not cancel out creative bankruptcy, it merely disguises it as culturally acceptable. Imagine if I painted a portrait of my cat with the same artistic style and posing as Mona Lisa. Never gave any official credit to fuck-ass Leonardo da Vinci. No one will even bat an eye. My lack of effort will be amusing, my non-existent artistic expression will be viewed as intentional, and my potential plagiarism will be seen as an obvious homage. Once something becomes so public, so a part of our cultural canon, it becomes impossible to steal from it, and only possible to reference it. On the other hand, imagine if I painted my cat again, but this time I did this in the same exact style as some obscure Instagram artist, and just like Da Vinci never credited them officially, I'll be seen as a creatively bankrupt plagiarist and a fraud, despite the fact that only thing that changed is not my lack of effort, not my creative bankruptcy, or my offense to the other artist, just the public's very own cultural and emotional context of the thing itself. But that does not make me any more of an artist in either case, does it? I'm not arguing that public's reaction to one or the other instance is right or wrong, just that depending on our context and knowledge on specific art pieces, our reactions are deeply subjective and biased when it comes to flagging and chastising unoriginality and fraudulence. And nostalgic art is a perfect bypass tool for clowns like Matt Duffer, whichever he is, to capitalize off of. The Duffers are creatively and artistically bankrupt set of individuals who profited the hell off of the loophole I'd like to call, who cares, it's a 40-year-old IP, hence has been a part of our general sociocultural possession and consciousness for decades now. Therefore, you can't ever really steal from it, you can only derive from it, and derive, oh boy, they did.
We really weren't quite sure how to shoot the scene, and we really looked at Witness and how Peter Weir shot that scene.
Stranger Things wasn't the first IP to heavily capitalize off of nostalgia, but it sure as hell was one of the biggest pioneers of an era of surgically extracting people's own memories, sewing a price tag onto them to sell it right back, repurposing existent art with different marketing and packaging tactics until we were all cannibalizing the same two artistic concepts, ideas, stories, arcs, styles over and over and over again, chewing them, spitting them back out, calling the saliva-thickened gunk novel art, licking it right up only to chew it again, never swallowing, never digesting, never pooping it out into the wild to let it fucking rest in peace. And at the center of it all are the Duffer brothers, the inspiration, the role models to us all, teaching us an important lesson that in order to change the world, talent, hard work, and imagination is all that you will never need. Which brings us to the actual genius of the brothers, their ability to take their own biggest weakness and a flaw and sell it as an intentional marketing strategy. These two made their own lack of originality and creativity and need to feed off of others' works seem like a conscious creative choice that they made as opposed to what it was, a mere necessity for them to exist as filmmakers, a kind of parasitism that extends beyond mere referentialism, flattery, and love lettering. It's enough to look at the Duffers' original pitch pamphlet and the makeshift trailer that they made for Stranger Things pilot to know that they knew what they had at its most original could only ever be interpreted as a Stephen King / Steven Spielberg fan fiction. So they filled it to the brim with references to Jaws, It, E.T., Encounters of the Third Kind, etc., and pitched it as a love letter as opposed to a statement on their own lack of artistry. This became such an integral part of their identity that as up-and-coming, unprivileged, poor, scrambling filmmakers, they fucking left a whole set of producers for committing a heinous crime of not getting their references. And poor Duffers didn't know how else to pitch it.
You can't use movie references to pitch the show. And I was like, they don't know Jaws?
Yeah.
Like, they haven't seen E.T.? And then we left those producers.
Yeah.
That was not a smart thing to say to us. Because I was like, I just don't know how to pitch it then. Yeah. I don't know how to pitch it.
I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you have trouble summarizing or selling your own written project that you wrote without needing to verbally read out an entire fucking bibliography like it's a fucking end of your Microsoft Word document, maybe just give up. Or don't, and get like $1 billion Netflix deal and make even more $1 billion. It's up to you, really.
The early days before we had written the pilot, we were talking to had some general with an exact. It's like if the long lost Stephen King book was found by Steven Spielberg and he directed it, and we just got blank stares, and I was like, what? I haven't even written it, but how could you not think that sounds amazing?
So the lesson here, kids, is that you cannot physically plagiarize something you're verbally sucking a dick off every time you open your goddamn mouth. I would give them a courtesy of calling them fanfiction writers, which is miles better than referring to them as thieves, but fanfiction writers are actually passionate about writing. They do it for free, for fuck's sake. These two cannot even be bothered to write a page for $200 million.
We finished on Wednesday. This is fresh. Speech! Hot off the presses. Speech? Yeah! No, I know, we thought about it. I was like, I just feel like...
They're like a scam email in human form. And just like D&D, the biggest evidence against their independent capabilities is, well, their capabilities. Just strip them from any source material, throw them in an empty corporate room, and watch as they flop around trying to come up with an original thought for once in their lives. What a shame there was never a 2-hour-long documentary so we could watch them do exactly that. I want to take a moment, a break, to talk about a subject I couldn't fit into any other part of this video, which is the Montauk Project. If you have been living under a rock, not only was Stranger Things vaguely based on the Montauk Project conspiracy, but it was originally also pitched and greenlit under the name of Montauk. It was supposed to be set in Montauk, New York, instead of Hawkins, Indiana. The official reasoning given as to why the switch-up happened was to cut production costs, since filming in Long Island would be deathly expensive and unmanageable, because, as we all know, Hollywood famously loves and absolutely has to film on location, a devastating obstacle that could not have been overcome without changing and rebranding the entire identity of the show and inventing a whole new town and title, because that was so much easier than recreating an already existing town, but whatever. But it is kind of curious how the element of the show that used to hold a primary foundational importance kind of turned into a forgotten fun fact the moment the show was greenlit. Now, I want you to take a look at this clip right here. So the clip is from 2011 short film named, you guess it, Montauk. It's named Montauk. And I know that the concept of levitation and possession is nothing new to the horror genre, and I would easily pass its particularity and eerie similarity to the Vecna curse off as coincidental, unless the coincidence happened to be from a movie that the Duffers already have been sued over for idea theft years before. The director Charlie Kessler didn't sue Duffers for anything related to this clip. He sued them in 2018, way before Vecna was ever a thing, and the show at the time only had 2 seasons out. Kessler sued them for allegedly stealing ideas from him exclusively for the very pilot episode of Stranger Things, also titled Montauk. His own film reportedly centered around a boy named Michael who woke up in a trance and walked to an abandoned military base in Montauk and suddenly disappeared. A cop with the haunted past vows to find the boy and discovers that the government is experimenting on children at Camp Hero, endeavoring to create psychic weapons and portals to the alien world. The cop does find Michael eventually, but the boy seems to have been altered by the experiments. He opens a portal above the base, disrupting the space-time continuum. And I say reportedly because the short film in its entirety is unavailable on the internet, which is making it impossible to judge on any other front. But isn't it a curious thing, or quite a coincidence, or a very tragic, completely accidental commonality that the singular 50-second clip that is available still somehow bears very particular resemblance to the very particular parts of Stranger Things. Parts that the Duffers were never even sued for in the first place. However, we will never officially know anything more because the Kessler case was never solved, it was never settled, it was dismissed, not by the judge, but by Kessler himself, 2 days before the trial was set to happen. So, tragically, I have to announce the end of this interlude and go back to the Duffers and their grating, monotonous, constant vocal fry. A question. Does the ability of taking multiple ideas from existing IPs and sewing them together in a cohesive way imply artistic merit or denounce the very concept of it? What marks the difference between remixing and creating a playlist? Well, the difference is that the former requires a particular unique vision that necessitates it recycling concepts to create the result greater than the sum of its already famously existing parts, and the latter is, well, a playlist. Repetition. We're heating almost half a century old leftovers because it's simpler than cooking up a whole new thing. Are we at least pouring a ketchup onto the damn thing to make it taste at least a bit fresher? No? What does Stranger Things represent that is simply not the sum of its borrowed parts? That is not the themes of family and friendship lifted straight out of a Rob Reiner film or a Stephen King book? Horror that is not John Carpenter imagery, sci-fi, fantasy that is not a Spielberg ripoff? What does Stranger Things say, offer, or accomplish by stitching all those elements together? Does it transform them in any meaningful way to say something completely new? Redefine the margins of horror? Introduce brand new character dynamics or philosophy? Stuff that you wouldn't get by simply binging bunch of 70s or 80s IPs? Or are the Duffers just a pair of lucky children who got handed a couple of expensive vintage toys to play around with until they got bored and abandoned them in the mud, purposeless and meaningless? Stranger Things had a privilege of playing around with some of the most tried and true tropes, genres, archetypes, storytelling, and world-building tools.
Yeah, well, while you're talking to the lights, the rest of us are having a funeral for Will! I'm not letting him sit in that freezer another day!
It still managed to take them for granted, and use them to tell the most uninspired mess of an overarching story that ended up being much, much less than the sum of its parts.
You fucked with the wrong family.
The Duffers borrowed these playthings from legendary stories and storytellers, like Eleven's entire character just to treat her like a throwaway line written up last minute because the brothers were nearing a singular deadline. Vecna is a completely lackluster shell of a main villain with no existent philosophy or motive, held together by the glue that is Jamie Campbell Bower's performance. The story of Stranger Things, taken in its entirety, lacks any sort of definition, cohesive intent, or purpose. Yes, for 10 years this show represented a nostalgic park ride that you would get onto for a couple of hours of mindless fun and entertainment, with the character dynamics that would make you feel like you were watching Goonies and E.T. crossover directed by John Carpenter. But is that all that there is to its decade-old legacy? References and appropriations. Really? Stranger Things is not a remix, it's a playlist of all your favorite movies, books, and filmmakers. The Duffers' artistic merit being their good taste, I guess. The most defining and uniquely memorable aspects of the show are its atmosphere, production, music, visual design, acting, all the things never created by Duffers but simply curated by them, if that. Think of the first thing that pops up in your head when you think the words Stranger Things. Is that the Christmas lights scene? What if I told you that that single most iconic visual in the entire series was an idea from a co-writer the Duffers can't even recall the name of?
To this day, we don't really remember who came up with the Christmas lights idea, but
Do you think of Demogorgon's iconic design? What if I told you that that design was not a thing in the script and was conceptualized by Iron Sims Creative, the VFX team Duffers hired for concept art?
Basically, there wasn't that much description in the script. Requirements really were that it was going to be a biped. It's actually going to be humanoid.
What we ended up coming up with was this really interesting concept where the head kind of flowered open. Actually, Aaron was the first one that sketched out pencil sketches to try and get an idea down.
Do you think of the main theme composed by Kyle Dixon and Michael Stein? Do you think of how cool looking Upside Down is? The Duffers had such little understanding of their own world that they apparently did not even plan to explore the Nether until Aaron Sims Creative conceptualized the entire look along with the floating particles idea. Making a TV show is very much a collaborative effort. However, once a thing becomes as famous as Stranger Things, the distribution of credibility is not as collaborative, is it? When evaluated in isolation, the Duffers' talent and creativity and actual unique artistic input and output is not even close to being directly proportional, not only to the success, status, money, and reputation that their derivative tendencies gained them, but also to the people that they hired to help make Stranger Things actually happen.